Welcome to the second part of our webinar. So in the first part, we were running applets or running apps, and now we will be actually creating them, building them, and figuring out all of the specifics and customization that you can have. My name is Anastasia Sedlakova, and I am a community engagement scientist working in DNAnexus focused on UKB rap. And
I'm Ted Lederis, so I'm a principal scientist and bioinformatics trainer at DNAnexus.
And so what are our learning objectives for today? So firstly, we will define the steps, how to add app or applet and creating a workflow in user interface, describe the steps of development cycle in the platform, describe the structure and dependencies that we need to build our applet. Describe the flow of the data during the job execution, and apply DX workflow JSON to build a workflow. So Ted is working on app building cheat sheet that will be available, and you will get it after the webinar. And in case you missed part one, we will have a link to slides and recording in our community forum. So we encourage you to look there. You don't have to register to look in the community. If you want to ask questions or answer on the question, please register. It's very easy. So before we will start with all of these app building things, let us just remind what is a cloud-based analysis. And we can do it using this schema. So in the beginning, you have some scripts and you have some data, or maybe you just have data and you don't have scripts. So you want to analyze your data, and you are requesting worker or some ephemeral computer somewhere. You also provide environment. So what operation system would it be? Some other, like what would be the memory and so on. How many cores should it be? You run code there, you create some results, and then the output of your code is transferred back to project storage, and you get the results. So just to emphasize that with a cloud-based computing, you are specifying what computer you would like to have, and then you are renting it. And the computer is created, the instance is created for you based on what specification you have. So let us go into the steps of creating app conceptually, and then we'll go into much details using some code examples. So you start with creating your app or applet locally. So our toy applet that we will be creating today is called SumToolsCountName. And then you build an app or applet on UKB wrap. And by building, you're actually moving it to your project. And maybe you remember that with applet, applets are living in specific projects. So you're building it, and your applet now is living inside the UKB wrap in the cloud. So when you're running your applet, and you may remember this slide from the first part, is that so you start your analysis using an applet, and by doing that, you're actually sending all of the specification, and this specification is predefined when you are building your app or applet. And using this specification, the specific instance is prepared in the cloud for you and to run your applet or app. And when you are running it, so for example, here, again, our SumToolsCount app, which is counting alignments from the CRUN file. So you send input data, because somewhere on the cloud, you have your input data. In our case, it will be UK Biobank CRUN files. Then the whole applet is running there. So the SumToolsCountName applet is counting alignments in the specified and provided CRUN files. And then result, like the number of the count of alignments count, is sent back to the project. So this was the concept of how we will be building and running applet. And now we can look at the applet from the user perspective. So what need you to know when you're creating an applet? So as I said already today, that our toy applet will be SumToolsCountName. And for that, we will be using, and you will look more into exact code that we have in our applet. Some tools view -- count to count number of alignments in the file. Input for us will be CRUM files released from whole exome sequencing data. And the output will be TXT file, which have the CRUM file prefix here, that will be uploaded back to platform. And inside this file will be number of alignments. And dependencies for this applet is SAMTools program. So this is how the output look like. So in case you don't know where it is or where you can find output, we encourage you to look at our first part of our webinar, and you will see the output. And when you click on the output, you will see total number of reads and the number of reads there. So this is basically our applet that we'll be working on today. So what are the applet development concepts? So the cycle that we will emphasize here is you develop locally, or we will now show how you can check your code before actually developing your applet. You build your applet and you run it on the cloud, and then you say like, I want to change it, I want to make it better, and then you go through this cycle again and again. So this is a proposed development cycle for your applet. And as I said, that there could be another way than to test it locally. Well, this is a perfect opportunity to try our Swiss Army knife tool, which can be used for this as a starting point for bioinformatics analysis because it has something pre-installed. But why we want to use it, or why we recommend to use it for testing applets or the applet code, is that with Swiss Army knife, you can use Docker image or a link to the public Docker Hub image as a parameter. So you can provide Docker image where inside would be your code and with all of the dependencies, and you can test it on the UKB Wrap platform. And so by testing it, you will know whether your code is working. So if we will look to our cycle here, so instead of developing it locally, you can develop your code using Swiss Army knife and test it, and then go to the build. So if you click on a Swiss Army knife, you will see this kind of a diagram. So you have some image file, then you have different of input files, and then there is some output. And this is very generic because this is a really like very powerful tool that you can use for different use cases. So you can, when you're specifying your, when you want to run Swiss Army knife, so there is a command line parameter when you can put the command line expression that you want to run. And then is also an image. You can provide an image file of the Docker image file that is stored in the project directory, or you can do it differently. So the command remains the same here. So we will look more into this command later, but this is actually, this will do this will count alignment for us. And as an alternative to provide image file, which is on the project, you can also have a public Docker image, so you can provide it here. The only note that we would like to point here is that we do not recommend to use this thing like with public Docker images for the batch jobs, because each time you have to download Docker image from the public Docker Hub, and you could have problems with the limitation of the number of downloads of the image file. Okay, so this was our like step 0, let's say, before you actually doing any applet building. But these are like the 3 main steps that we will go. What you will do if you test your code and you say, I want to make an applet out of it. So we start with DX App Wizard, which will help you to create a skeleton structure and some configuration JSON file that will go more in a minute. Then you fill out the skeleton that is provided by the DXApp wizard. You specify shell script, or you customize software environment, and you then use build command, dxbuild exactly, to build your applet into the project so you can use it lately. So with a directory structure of basic applet, our toy applet example is, this is what you get out of the structure that you get out of the DXApp wizard. So here you have DXApp JSON, which will be important for us, and our bash script that we'll be using to actually perform analysis. DXApp JSON is a JSON file with some configurations, including some input specification, where we're specifying what input parameters are, then also output specification, what output parameters are, and run specification, like what code do we run, what environment do we have, or do we need to have. And together with the JSON, we also have the bash script. In our case, it's sumtools_count sh, where the actual thing is done. And so for now, there is a lot of like different arrows that you see, a lot of code. We will go into different part of code. What I need to emphasize is that DXApp JSON, DXApp wizard will create this skeleton structure. It will also create a JSON which will fill in by what you specified during the wizard procedure. And this will also link to your bash script. So for example, here I'm specifying that input is mapping Scrum, and here I'm using it as a bash variable. Here I'm specifying that dependencies are sumtools, and here I'm using sumtools. And here I'm specifying that output will be count_txt, and here you see that I'm using it in my script. So these are the basic linkages. DXApp JSON provides some specification, and then a bash script that will actually perform analysis, or where the analysis code is. So let's go right now into applet development examples. Now we have everything that we need. So example applet code will be on our GitHub. So just check it time to time. I think that next week it will be available. And this is our applet that I'm already mentioning a few times, but here it's a more like in details. This is actually what we will be providing to the DXApp wizard. There is a name, the name meaning like not nice name. For nice name, we have a title, which is sumtools count alignment. And then we also have a summary, like to help your users or your future self in the next, I don't know, after half of a year, what actually this code is doing. So now we will be using the DXApp wizard here. So here is a basic applet structure, which is created by the DXApp wizard. And we will be using the DXApp JSON to customize our app, to install some different softwares, specify what language our applet is, what instances do we like to use. And we need to place our script into the src like source directory. Okay, so here is the required information that we need to know. We need to know what inputs are, we need to know what outputs are, and we need to know what execution language will be. And here are some optional information, meaning that there are some default values for that. Timeout policy, software environment, whether it needs internet access, instance type, and a template. So when you type the DXApp wizard, and in case you have never used DX tools, then this is a link how you can download DX toolkit into your command line. So this is something that you type in your local machine after logging into our platform and installing DX tools. And in case you want to know more about it, then we encourage you to look at the first part when we were talking a bit more about how you can log in and how you can install DX tools. So you start by using the DXApp wizard, and you start by, so there's an interactive tool which asking you different questions, or you need to specify different information. Then, so after providing some information about the applet, you need to provide information about each input and each output that it will need or that it will produce. So here we have mapping scrum, and you see that then you could have a label, which is like human readable name. In our case, it would be CRUM file with alignment. And then you can select what data type is. So Ted will be talk more in details about these different data types. For this example, it will be file, because CRUM files are part of bulk files. When your project gets dispensed, you have directory bulk, and then you will get like something like whole exome sequencing, CRUM files, and then the files are organized by 2 digits of their EID number. You can also specify whether it's an optional parameter, but since it's the only one parameter that we have, it's not optional, which is a no. Then you need to specify output specification, or maybe multiple inputs, but in our case, it's only one input. That's why we're directly moving to output specification. You have an output name, again, label, and class. The class is the same as it would be for an input parameter. So here are the different classes that we could have. So in our example, for both input and output, we will be using files classes. Also, you can use Boolean type, string, or record. And record is something, for example, a cohort is a record. But our simple example, we have in input specification, and this is an extract of DXApp JSON file. That class is file for the mapping scrum, and for counts.txt class is also file. Then you need to provide output specification that whether you need to provide some specification about the access, whether there need to be access to the internet, and whether it need to be direct access to the parent project. But direct access to the parent project, meaning like apart from all of the input file that you provided, which is in most cases no. Then you will also specify timeout policy, which is defaultly 48 hours, and template option. Currently, you can select from 2 options, Python or Bash, and that will show it with R, how you can use it. And then you need to choose instances. So currently, you will be seeing all of the instances, but you need to use those instances that are for AWS. And after that, it starts generating your applet skeleton, and then you will see something like this. So the name of directory will be applet name that you provided, and inside that it will be generating README for developers, then Markdown README for users, DXApp JSON for customization, then resources directory, source directory, and put actually your script there, and also test directory. So in order to summarize it, then we will be using as an input parameter name is CRUM mappings _ CRUM as CRUM file. Output is counts_txt, and it will be alignment count file. Both are types files. And here there is some description that we have. We used the default timeout policy, default and not access to internet. Instant type were selected like this, which is also default. Programming language is Bash, and we do not need access to parent project because access to input is handled separately, and we do not have to care about that. what is very important is that currently you need to change your region in order to run it on rep. So please change it just after your DX.json was generated before building your applet. In case you forgot, there will be a very helpful error saying that, oh, you need to change your region. So you need to change it to AWS column EU West 2, which is Europe, London. And you can just edit your DX.json file directly for that. So this was the example of how you can do your applet from scratch. But what if you just want to use, for example, I would like to use TED applet and make it just a bit better. So what I can do is I can use dxget, and then I can provide ID of applet, which is already created. And this will download on my local machine. The directory in this example is sumtools_count_name. It will download everything. I can then customize code, and I can then customize a JSON file.
Just a quick note. So all apps that are globally available and applets, you can basically use a dxget command. And this is a great way to basically tweak an app if you don't like it, as Anastasia said, but it's also a great learning opportunity.
Yeah, and we will be also, it's not only for the applet, but it's also for the workflows, and you will be actually showing it in the workflow part. So now we will go to the part B. So so executable scripts in your app. So far we were covering more like how you are building your, how you're not building, but creating your applet using Wizard. And now we will be looking at what are the executable scripts, how and what are the parts of it that need to be there. So here is our script that we will be using, the sumtools_count.sh, and it's pretty small, but it contains some important parts. Here we're using the variable, and we will have more in the next few slides how you can use helper variable here. But basically this will download the file into the instance storage. So inside the instance that is created for us. Yeah. Then we're actually running our command. This is the main point of our analysis. We're counting alignments here, and we're putting it into our out file, which we are specified here. Then, once we have our file with alignment counts, we need to upload it to project. Again, remember, instance storage will only exist until the session, until the end of the session. After that, it disappears. And we covered a lot into our first or second, I think the first session of our Jupyter Lab. So once you have your file uploaded into the project, you also need to register it, that it will be shown as an output for this particular job. And for that, we will be using dxjob util add output. Okay, so the script that we are having here, how does the applet know that it needs to run it? Then, because it's specified in our run specification, we see that there's interpreter is bash, and here is the file path that is src/sumtools_count. So I was telling you that we have some helper variables that could help you to make your code more generic or your outputs. So, for example, here we're using some cram files, and let's look what our different helper variables mean. So mapping cram, sorry for that, and it's an object that contains DNAnexus link like project and file, project ID and file ID. Then we have also name, which is basically file name, and then we have mappings underscore cram underscore pass, which is file name with the pass. And then we have mappings underscore cram underscore prefix, and this will be this part of the file name before the extension .cram. So we can use it, and we will be actually using it in our script example. So here you can see the different parts. There are like 3 main parts that we have, and don't worry, there is a lot of it. We will go line by line. So first is download files, and we do it using dx download and specifying here our file. So just remember, the mapping scrum is a file in the project. So we're specifying where exactly in the project, in what project our file is located. Yeah. Then we have the execution part. This is where we're specifying our output, again, using our helper variables, mappings underscore cram underscore prefix in our case. And here we're running some tools on that and saving our result into the specified output file. And the last part is we need to upload and register. So we upload using dx upload, but we are using -- brief option. We were talking about it a little bit in the first part, and what it does, it will just return the file ID, which we're saving here as a variable, and then we're using this variable to actually link this output file as a result of this particular job, using dx jobutil at output. So this was our standard parts of the script. What you can also do a bit differently, in case you have a lot of inputs, you can use dx download all inputs, and you can look into the documentation here. And then all of the inputs would be in directory, and then you need to specify it using pass helper variable. So we were talking about how you can build your, how you can create your applet, but now Ted will be talk about how you can actually build your applet.
Thanks, Anastasia. So let's talk about building the applet. So basically you have kind of filled out your applet skeleton after using the DX app wizard. This part might seem a little anticlimactic, but let's go over it. It's really important. So if you were editing your shell script, your samtools_count.sh file, you want to go back into the root folder of your applet. So again, your applet is contained in a folder, and we want to basically get to that root folder. And then within that folder, you can run a dx build dot. So that is going to basically build the app in that folder. One thing, and I was actually doing this yesterday when I was testing doing some final testing with integrating Docker. I was editing my app, I was building it, and I was testing it. So if you add this -f argument, basically it's going to rebuild the applet and overwrite the original one. So this is a very important flag when you're actually doing kind of iterative testing. So once the app is on the platform, you can run it like we talked about in the previous session in part 1. So now you can see that we can run our app on the UI. It has our input and our output. So our input was mappings _cram and then counts txt. Or you can run it on the command line. And this is where things become really powerful. So, basically now you have your app, you can basically run it in batch mode. You can do lots of powerful things with it. So we didn't talk about DX app JSON. So this is where we're going to get to this section. There is a lot of information in this section, so I'm not going to go through all of the details. Like, this is really for your reference. And again, we will have an app cheat sheet and the slides available for you, so you can go back and kind of learn more about it. But we're going to be covering basically customizing your software environment, using Docker, and then finally, if you have an R script you want to utilize, how do you integrate it into an applet? So Anastasia hopefully talked a little bit about DX app JSON components, but we're going to be focusing on, mostly focusing on this run spec portion of the DX app.json. Oh, and before I forget, Laurel had a great question, and just want to kind of address that. Just a second. Let me see, where was it in chat? So the question was, Mate already answered it, but the question was, what are the advantages of building an applet versus running commands in Swiss Army knife? This is a great question. So Mate had a very helpful answer. I'll just read that. So in general, you want to use applets or apps for better software dependency management. So as we'll see in this section, you can do a lot of customization. So if you need to use tools that are not pre-installed with Swiss Army knife, apps are also more portable in workflows. So you can basically customize your inputs and outputs, as you've seen. Okay. So back to DX app JSON. So we are going to be focusing mostly on this run spec section of DX app.json. Although I lied, okay, so one thing to note is when you're kind of building your app for batch submission, you can use these array versions of the data classes. So for example, if you want your app to take a number of files as input, you can use this array file class for inputting multiple files on the platform. You can also use this in the output. So we do want to point you to the documentation. Using this is different. You have to basically use bash arrays, and the notation is very specific. So definitely please look at the documentation for more about working with arrays. So we already saw in our run spec, Anastasia already helpfully talked about this, that we have our interpreter, and then we have our location of our file script here, or our script that we want to run here. So let's talk about software dependencies. So apologies, again, a lot of information here, but I just want to mention that you can use a lot of different dependency managers or package managers. For example, like, we want to install SAM tools. So we can use basically apt to install it. So we could do an apt-get install SAM tools by specifying package manager is apt. But there are also other package managers that are available. So if we have an R package we want to install, we can specify that here. So here we want to install dplyr, and we can specify package manager is equal to cran. Finally, you can also install Python packages by specifying pip as package manager. These are just a few of the ways to kind of install packages. So you can also build from GitHub. I didn't want to kind of make this slide more confusing, but there'll be information and documentation and in the cheat sheet that's coming. This is also where you are able to, the run spec is also where you're able to customize the instance type. So like, for example, if you need an instance that requires GPUs, you can select an instance type that contains that. So that's done within the system requirements element. And then you can also specify distribution, the underlying distribution of Linux, and then what release you want to use for that. Okay, so this was kind of that's kind of how you basically install with lots of different other packages. But how do you install with Docker? You use Docker in your applet. So this is kind of a process. So Anastasia showed you one way that you can actually have a Docker pull command in your script. We don't really recommend that when you're doing batch processing. What we actually recommend is that you pull the container image onto your own machine and basically do a Docker save. So here we're basically pulling the SAM tools from biocontainers with this particular tag. And then we're going to do a Docker save to save that image into a tar.gz file. So called samtools.tar.gz. Then you're going to upload the snapshot using dxupload. So this is our, this should be samtools.tar.gz. We'll fix that when the slides go out. And then basically that will upload that into your project. And you want to basically, when you're building your app, you want to have a snapshot as your input. In your script, you can use Docker load. There needs to be a little redirect arrow here. We'll fix that. And then you can use Docker run to run your Docker snapshot. So this is kind of the basic idea. So one thing to note is that when you are using Docker images, a lot of Docker images require access to the internet. So you do want to enable internet access in your DX app JSON. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But here in our DX app JSON, we're specifying an input called Docker image here. And the class of that is a file. So we are going to basically, we've got our Docker snapshot in our project, and then we can basically use that snapshot as one of our file inputs. So I'm not going to go over everything in this slide, but this is kind of the basic process here. You're going to want to basically download the Docker image. You're going to want to load the Docker image using Docker load. And then you need to, when you do a Docker run, you need to mount home/DNAnexus as a volume. And then you can basically use Docker run on the container. So here you can see we're running that samtools view command. And this is how we're going to run it. This is our input BAM file, and this is our output BAM file. So this was as simple as I can make this. I was up late last night, like debugging this. I know this works. So if there's more, we'll have much more information about kind of running Docker as well. So just want to mention that there is an app built into the platform called TTYD. And I was actually using this last night to prototype the Docker version of our app. So what it does is basically it opens a terminal in a web browser for a temporary worker. The other option is if you're on the command line, you can also run Cloud Workstation and SSH into that worker machine. So I will say that when you're trying to basically get that Docker run command to work, this is a really helpful way to kind of prototype that. So you can basically do a DX download of your Docker image, then test in Docker load, and then testing the Docker run. So we did mention that when you have you're including Docker as a Docker image, you will have to enable access to the network, the internet. Other examples are if you're working with the TC, like you're working with kind of an external resource, such as the TCGA cancer database. Yes. But for the most part, if you don't need internet access, the default is no. And also, will the app need access to the parent project? So in the vast majority of the cases, because you specified the files as inputs, you don't need to have access to the parent project. But there's more information about this in the documentation. Okay, so like last kind of little bits about working with a run spec is that if you have executables, so if we had the samtools executable, we can put it in the resources /usr/bin directory. And then we can basically, so if I could put samtools in this directory, and then I can just basically run samtools in my bash script. I don't have to basically, because that's on the path of the Docker container. So this is kind of the final little bit. I want to really kind of talk, and I want, I am an R user myself, so I did want to kind of show you how to utilize R scripts within a bash app. So say you have a script called myscript.r, and say you want to load a file from the project storage into your script. So let's kind of go over this. So the first thing is you want to download your input file. And then you can use the rscript command to run your script, and you can pass in an argument here. So here the argument is input, and then we are going to put in the file name of the file. And remember, this is a helper variable, so this is the actual file name as it is downloaded onto the worker. And then you can use the command args to basically grab that argument, and you can use that directly into a command such as file.read.delim. So here you basically access that file name with the args $input accessor here. And then we've loaded it in as a CSV file, and then we can do whatever we need to. We can even write a CSV file out and do whatever we need to do with it. Okay, so we're going to finally talk about building workflows. This, again, we talk about native workflows here, but we'll also talk about WDL in the next session coming in January. So let's talk about building our very first workflow. So we're going to use some pre-built apps on the platform. So we are going to use DNAnexus. So our idea is we want to take in a bunch of input VCF files. We want to combine them into a single VCF file using DNAnexus. And then we want to pass that file that we've merged into as snipf to annotate them with various kind of functional information. So we're going to start out with the GUI. You can do this and there's directions on starting your own dxworkflow.json. But I actually find it easier to basically start the workflow in the GUI, and then I will use a dx-get and then start customizing the dxworkflow.json. You'll see that there's this drag and drop facility with the GUI that's really helpful. So we can start a new workflow by basically saying new workflow under the add menu here. And you will get into this workflow builder window. So you can add a step here by clicking on this add a step. button. And basically you can select kind of tools that are apps that are either global, or you can select applets that are in your project. So here we're going to add in DNAnexus as a step in our analysis. So now you can see that DNAnexus has been added. Then we'll use the same process to add in SNP-F. So this isn't a complete workflow. And the way you can tell that is that you've got this set inputs here. So we need to wire the output of DNAnexus into SNP-F. So we do that. So this is why I like the GUI here, is that you can actually drag and drop. So this is that PVCF that is an output of DNAnexus, and we can drag and drop this output onto this input. That way we have wired things together. And if you look now, the whole workflow is runnable. So this is a finished workflow. So we have taken this, it takes our basically a bunch of VCF files and produces a single VCF file. And we use that as input to SNP-F annotate to get our annotated VCF file. So we're showing you how to kind of work with you basically kind of prototyped it in the GUI. Now you can use DXGet with a workflow ID, and you can get the actual workflow folder with the DX workflow.json file. This is a nice, so if you have run an analysis with a workflow and you want a list of the inputs to use as an input for your workflow, you can actually use a DX describe and pipe that into JQ to extract all of the input fields and put it into a JSON file here. So I realize everyone's probably a little brain dead here, but this is what the DX workflow.json looks like. So this has been a lot of information, but I just want to emphasize here that you can see we've got those different stages of the workflow, and that we can specify in an input a particular stage, which corresponds to here, and the output field as an input to the next stage. Building the workflow with DX workflow.json is similar. So you basically get into your root folder of your workflow, and then you can run DX build. And then when the workflow is built, you can see now that we are basically going to run that workflow, and we are passing in multiple BAM files. So let's kind of wrap things up. The building apps cheat sheet is coming. Just want to make sure it's bulletproof, but it will be posted in community. So this was a big session. So hopefully you are able to now accomplish these learning objectives. And just want to end with the UKB information about the UKB RAP community. Again, all of this information is going to be available on community, and there are links to this. These slides will be posted there, and there will also be links to the GitHub repository with material for the webinars, so you can see the example apps. And with that, we'll end with questions. So thanks for sticking with us. And again, I realize this was a lot of information. So, but hopefully a lot of this you can kind of go and study on your own. And we have kind of given you at least some of the tools and concepts that you need.